All right, guys, so one of the biggest culprits you see online for lower back pain is a deadlift. Now, I'm not gonna say that the deadlift puts you in a position where you're more prone to get injured. I think the deadlift is just a tool, right? The deadlift is just an exercise. Saying that the deadlift is gonna hurt your lower back is like saying the scissors that you ran around the pool with stabbed you in the eye and it's the scissors' fault. It's like, no, you're using the tool incorrectly. You're using the tool poorly. And we need to do a better job at that. We need to kind of understand how low back pain can happen with a deadlift and how we can kind of mitigate it if it's already happened. So first and foremost, what we need to look into is what is a deadlift, right? So a conventional deadlift off the floor, if you want to come on over here, should look like a hinging movement, right? So we have a couple different styles of movement. One is a squat, it's more knee dominant. The other is a hinge, it's more hip dominant, right? A deadlift should be more hips than it should be knees, right? The other thing we need to focus in on is that we're making sure that the movement is coming from the hips itself as opposed to the lower back, right? How many times you see somebody newer in the gym or somebody struggling with a max lift and they kind of tuck their butt and their lower back rounds and everything looks horrible? That's the reason that people get into pain with deadlifts, is because their form gets out of whack, they don't know what they're doing, and they just put too much weight on the bar. So if you have a good understanding of what a deadlift should be, it should be a stable torso, right? If you notice here, my torso is braced, strong, stable. Movement is only coming from my hips, right? So as I get into this position, I lock in nice and tight, nice and strong, stand straight up, repeat it. Pretty straightforward. Now, I'm gonna say something that's gonna be very unpopular for most people. Unless you're a competitor, unless you're competing in powerlifting or strongman where you have to pull from the floor, nobody says that you have to pull a conventional deadlift from the floor. So one of the biggest problems with people who hurt their lower backs on the deadlift is they don't get into a good position from the start. They don't have the mobility or they don't have the stability to get into that position and maintain it through that full range of motion. So what do? If I've hurt myself in my lower back deadlifting or I'm new to deadlifting, how do we ingrain that pattern and get better? We have to elevate the bar. So we go absolute basement level. This is the most remedial version of this exercise, and we're going to progress as we go. So let's see it. If I am working with somebody who has a lower back pain and they're just getting back into deadlifting or just getting back into training, we got to make sure that we're in pain-free ranges. Now, this is not for everybody. If you have lower back pain, you need to understand what the real causes are. If I'm working with somebody that is, let me just fall in the box here. If I'm working with somebody that is flexion intolerant, so that rounding over position lights up their lower back, that's how I know, right? They're more than likely had that issue from a position where they are in flexion, right? So the bottom of a deadlift didn't look very good. They were rounded over, looking like a gorilla humping a football. So we need to get a better pattern. We need to understand, start from the top down, right? First off, we got to work on the brace. I've talked about this a lot in other videos. You've seen it in the train your ass off footage. I'm always trying to cue bracing, trying to cue positioning of that pelvis and that rib cage to make sure that we are stable here. Because if we are not stable here, that lumbar spine starts to get into a funky situation, and that's when bad things start to happen. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to break every time your lumbar spine flexes, but if you do it long enough, if you flex under enough load, bad things can happen. So if you're rehabbing or if you're getting back into lifting and you want to get back into a hinge movement, what we need to do is we need to centralize the weight. So put it closer to your center of gravity, right? Because with a deadlift bar, that weight's out in front, putting you into that forward flex position. So we need to reduce that. We need to put you in a position where you can maintain your brace, maintain your positioning, and do the left lift effectively. So what I like to do is my guys coming back from an injury, getting them back in the gym, is elevate the weight and reduce the weight, right? So we're looking to build their skill. We're looking to build their technical ability and re-ingrain a good pattern. It takes a lot of reps done perfectly to ingrain a good pattern that will carry over to when the weight gets heavy. So I start with some sort of elevated surface, and I start with a kettlebell. Reason, that weight is centralized over that midfoot, and it's easier for them to control. So what I'll have them do, line this up with like their ankle bone, so in the middle of their foot, reaching that hip back, keeping that head up, reaching for the handles, pressing right through. Now you'll be surprised, even if you're really, really strong, putting yourself in these positions, forcing yourself to really lock in and understand the movement pattern you're trying to do can be fatiguing over time. But the real thing is, and the point that I'm trying to make here is you're trying to progress. So how do we progress this? Two ways. You can either reduce the lift of the blocks, take one of these blocks away and keep going, keep progressing. But what I like to do is I like to increase the weight first. So I'll go to a heavier kettlebell. I'll go to 2 kettlebells held in the same position. And then what I do is then I transfer to a different tool. So we'll come on over here and I'll show you. So once I have a client or an athlete kind of progress from that initial phase of that low back pain or that low back rehab, now we can start progressing the weight a little bit. So we use a trap bar. The reason being is that weight is still centralized in the middle of your body. It forces them into a really good position. And now, because we're using a trap bar, we can load. Now with most rehab, people are just stuck doing 3 sets of 10, very lightweight. With this, we want to progress it. We want to get your body to fire, get your body to lock in with heavier and heavier weights, especially if you're a competitor or you want to get back to pulling from the floor. So with this, again, there are different variations in terms of progression with this. Keeping the weight the same and going from the high handles to the low handles, and then reducing the height of the blocks is one way to do it, or the other, like I'd done before, increase the weight. I would increase the weight to a point where it starts getting challenging to hold that position, and then I would drop that weight and make sure that their form is really, really good and drop the block so it gets closer to the floor. Finally, after they get through the trap bar phase, they get through the kettlebell phase, we can get back to pulls from the floor. It's either from the floor or you can start from blocks again. But the idea is simple. It's slow progress over time to make sure that you're still in that pain-free zone, that you can maintain those good positions with increased weight. If you notice, we started with a kettlebell, which is very light, very close to that center of gravity. Then we progressed to the trap bar. Now that weight is increasing and it's forcing more upper back stability and upper back tightness and core stability as we drive through. So now, if I had blocks under this, which I probably would do, I wouldn't go right to the floor. This is requiring far more core stability, greater degrees of hip and knee flexion, and even more upper back tightness, upper back stability, that if you were progressing this for a few weeks, this would feel a lot easier. So guys, take your lower back situations seriously. Don't just think, oh, I tweaked my low back, I'll give it a couple days, it'll be fine. There's a problem. There's something going on in your training, in your execution of those lifts, in your programming, that's forcing you into bad positions, which can cause tweaks, can cause injuries, and makes training a whole hell of a lot less fun. So I'm actually going to be going more in depth on this in an article that you'll see on elitefts.com in the next couple months, where I really break down the steps that I take from one to the other. But this was a very basic overview I want you guys to take a look at and start thinking about and start asking yourself better questions about what your training is like, what your teammates' training are like if you have athletes that you work with, or your clients, your athletes, whoever you work with in that regard as well. So guys, thank you very much for checking out this video. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure your low backs don't hurt, and I will see you guys in the next one.